The dog stopped without warning. One moment, the K9 unit was cutting a clean line through frost-cracked earth. The next, the German shepherd sat hard on his haunches and refused to move. No growl. No bark. Just a rigid stillness, eyes locked on a patch of ground that looked no different from the rest of the dying field. Officer Jonah Hale felt the leash go slack in his hand, then taut again as the dog leaned forward and froze. The wind carried the smell of wet soil and old iron. Jonah didn't know it yet, but whatever lay beneath that ground would break the town, and him, with it. If you're the kind of reader who appreciates slow-burning suspense and stories that reward patience, staying with this one, and quietly supporting it, makes a difference. The call came in just before dawn, when the sky over Briar Hollow was the color of a bruise that hadn't decided whether to fade or deepen. "Unmarked disturbance," dispatch said. County surveyor flagged it during a boundary check. Old Miller land. Might be nothing. Nothing was usually something in Briar Hollow. Jonah Hale parked the cruiser at the edge of the field and shut off the engine. Silence rushed in, thick and almost aggressive. No traffic. No birds. Even the wind seemed hesitant, threading cautiously through the dead grass. He opened the back door. "All right, Rusty," he said quietly. The K9 jumped down, muscles rolling under his coat, ears already forward. Rusty had been with Jonah for 6 years, longer than Jonah's marriage, longer than his faith that this town could still surprise him in harmless ways. The dog trusted Jonah. Jonah trusted Rusty more than anyone else in Briar Hollow. The Miller land stretched out like a forgotten thought, 50 acres of scrubbed field bordered by woods that locals pretended were just trees and not something older, denser. No house anymore. Just the foundation stones, half swallowed by moss, and a rusted well-capped Jonah had warned kids away for more times than he could count. Jonah clipped the leash and gave the command. Track. Rusty moved forward, nose down, tail steady. Jonah followed, boots crunching over frozen weeds. The smell hit him first, earth turned too recently, sharp and damp, wrong for ground that hadn't seen a plow in decades. He radioed in. "Unit 3 on site. I'm starting a sweep." Static answered, then dispatch acknowledged. Rusty slowed. That was the first warning. Jonah felt it before he consciously registered it, the subtle change in the dog's gait, the tightening through the leash. Rusty circled once, twice, then stopped. And sat. Hard. Jonah frowned. "What is it, boy?" Rusty didn't look at him. His body was angled toward a patch of ground barely wider than a kitchen table. No markers. No flags. Just earth that seemed heavier, as if it remembered pressure. Jonah knelt, brushed aside dead grass with his glove. The soil beneath was darker, looser. His chest tightened. "Stay," he told Rusty, though the dog wasn't going anywhere. Jonah stood and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. No cars. No people. Just the distant groan of wind through pine. He took the shovel from the cruiser. The first dig turned over cold soil, the smell rising fast and metallic. The second dig struck something solid. Jonah froze. He crouched, fingers shaking as he brushed dirt away. At first, he thought it was a rock. Then the curve resolved itself into something unmistakable. A boot. Black leather. Cracked. Still laced. Jonah staggered back, heart slamming into his ribs so hard it stole his breath. He swallowed, forced himself forward again. He dug faster now, panic and training fighting for control. Soil flew. The shape beneath became clearer, shin, knee, the outline of a leg bent at an unnatural angle. "No," Jonah whispered, though there was no one to hear him. Rusty let out a low whine. Jonah uncovered the torso, then the skull. The face was partially intact, skin drawn tight and gray, jaw frozen open as if mid-scream. A familiar silver chain lay against the collarbone, its pendant catching weak morning light. Jonah recognized it instantly. He collapsed to his knees. "Oh God," he said hoarsely. "Oh God, no." The body belonged to Evan Mercer. 17 years old. Missing for 8. Declared a runaway. Jonah had signed the report himself. The town gathered before noon. They always did. Yellow tape fluttered uselessly as neighbors clustered at a respectful but hungry distance. Briar Hollow didn't have much, No mall, no cinema. But it had memory, and memory was currency. Sheriff Lyle Brackett arrived late, as usual. He stepped out of his SUV, adjusting his coat, eyes already narrowed in irritation. "You sure it's Mercer?" he asked. Jonah stood, dirt-streaked and hollow-eyed. "Positive." Brackett sighed, rubbed his jaw. "Jesus." Behind him, Deputy Claire Whitman watched silently. She was new, 3 years on the force, still carrying the belief that truth mattered more than comfort. Jonah avoided her eyes. The coroner worked methodically, gloved hands careful. "Cause of death won't be immediate," he said. "But this wasn't accidental. Trauma to the skull. Likely blunt force." Brackett nodded. "We'll handle it." Jonah snapped his head up. "Handle it how?" Brackett gave him a look. Warning, almost paternal. "By the book. Like always." Like always. That was the problem. As the body was lifted onto the stretcher, Jonah's mind replayed the night Evan Mercer vanished. The rain. The knock on the Mercer door. Evan's mother sobbing into Jonah's uniform, begging him to keep looking even after the official search ended. "Kids run," Brackett had said back then. "Some don't want to be found." Jonah had believed him. Or maybe he'd needed to. Claire stepped closer. "You okay?" Jonah nodded automatically. "Yeah." "She didn't buy it. Rusty never sits unless—" "I know," Jonah cut in. She hesitated. "We're reopening the case, right?" Jonah looked at Brackett. The sheriff was already talking to a county official, voice low, controlled. "I don't know," Jonah said. That night, Jonah couldn't sleep. The smell of soil clung to him even after 3 showers. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Evan's face, mouth open, accusing. He got out of bed and went to the garage. Rusty lifted his head as Jonah sat beside him on the concrete floor. Jonah pressed his forehead to the dog's neck, breathing in the familiar scent of fur and oil. "I failed him," Jonah whispered. Rusty didn't move. The next morning, a file appeared on Jonah's desk. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the Miller field. And a note, written in block letters. "You dug too shallow." Jonah's hands began to shake. The photograph stayed on Jonah's desk longer than it should have. He didn't pin it to the board. Didn't log it. Didn't tell Brackett. He slid it beneath a stack of old citations and stared at the wall until the office lights hummed themselves into meaninglessness. "You dug too shallow." That wasn't a threat. It was an accusation. By mid-morning, the autopsy report came in, preliminary, but damning enough to unsettle anyone still clinging to the runaway narrative. Evan Mercer had died the same night he disappeared. Skull fracture. Defensive wounds. Dirt in the lungs. Buried alive, or close enough. Jonah closed the file and pushed back from the desk. His reflection in the glass partition looked older than it had a week ago. Thinner. Like something essential had been scraped out. "Jonah." He turned. Claire Whitman stood in the doorway, arms folded, eyes sharp. "You going to tell me what's wrong?" she said. "Or are we going to keep pretending yesterday didn't punch a hole in the department?" Jonah hesitated, then reached under the papers and slid the photograph across to her. She studied it in silence. Her jaw tightened. "Someone wants us to keep digging." "Someone knows what's buried out there," Jonah said. "And they're not scared of you," Claire added. "Which means they're either stupid or confident." Jonah stood. "I'm going back to the field." Claire blinked. "Alone?" "No," he said. "With Rusty. And with someone who still believes evidence matters." She grabbed her jacket without another word. The Miller land looked different in daylight. Less ominous, maybe, but only if you didn't know what it had already given up. Survey flags fluttered where the body had been found. County tape lay slack, ignored by crows perched on fence posts like spectators. Rusty exited the cruiser with restrained tension. His body remembered. "Search," Jonah said. The dog moved, but not forward. He angled left, toward the tree line. Jonah frowned. That hadn't been the flagged disturbance. They followed Rusty through knee-high brush and into the woods, where the temperature dropped and the light thinned into gray shafts. The smell changed too, Mold, rot, water that never fully dried. Rusty slowed again. Claire whispered, "You see that?" Jonah nodded. A shallow depression. Covered carefully with leaves and pine needles this time. Someone had learned. Rusty didn't sit. He lay down. That was worse. Jonah felt a chill creep up his spine. "Mark it." They worked in silence, shovels biting into earth already loose beneath the disguise. Less than 2 feet down, the blade struck wood. Not a coffin. A door. Jonah cleared the edges, breath rasping. Rusty backed away, ears flat, whining now, soft, distressed. They pried the door open. The smell rushed out first. Then the truth. A narrow pit reinforced with rotting boards. Inside, bones. More than one set. A tangle of remains wrapped in scraps of clothing, jeans, a hoodie, a faded varsity jacket with a stitched name half rotted away. Claire gagged, turned away, then forced herself back. Jonah stared. "How many?" she asked. He didn't answer. They counted later. 4. 4 missing kids. All declared runaways. All closed cases. All signed off by Sheriff Lyle Brackett. The sheriff arrived fast this time. Too fast. He surveyed the scene, face pale but composed. Jesus Christ. Claire didn't look at him. "We need state involvement." Brackett's eyes flicked to Jonah. "That won't be necessary." Jonah met his gaze. "It already is." Something hardened behind Brackett's eyes. "You're emotional." "I'm accurate," Jonah said. Brackett stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think I wanted this? You think I didn't lose sleep over those files? Did you?" Claire asked sharply. Brackett ignored her. "We'll control the narrative. Quietly. This town doesn't need." "This town deserves the truth," Jonah snapped. A long silence followed. Brackett exhaled slowly. "Go home, Jonah. I'll handle the rest." It wasn't an order. It was a warning. That night, Jonah drove past the Mercer house. The lights were on for the first time in years. Evan's mother, Ruth Mercer, opened the door before Jonah knocked. She looked smaller than he remembered, grief having hollowed her out like wind through bone. "You found him," she said. Jonah nodded. She didn't cry. She just stepped aside and let him in. They sat at the kitchen table. The same table where she'd begged him not to give up. "I always knew," she said quietly. "He wouldn't have left without his jacket." Jonah swallowed. "I'm sorry." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "You believed them." He flinched. "Them." She held his gaze. "Brackett. The council. The ones who said it was easier to call my boy a runaway than admit something dark lived here." Jonah's chest tightened. "Did you ever suspect who?" Ruth hesitated. "I suspected everyone." When Jonah left, she pressed something into his hand. "A key." "He hid it in his room," she said. "Said if anything ever happened to him, I should give it to you." Jonah stared at the key all the way home. The storage unit was on the edge of town, one of those places people forgot until they needed to hide something. Unit 17. Jonah cut the lock. Inside were boxes. Files. A cheap camcorder. He pressed play. The footage was shaky. Evan's face filled the screen, eyes wide, terrified. "If anyone finds this," Evan said, voice cracking, "it's not just one person. They meet out by the old mill. Sheriff knows. Officer Hale doesn't. That's why I trust him." Jonah sank to the floor. The footage cut to black. Behind him, something shifted. "Jonah," a familiar voice said softly, "you shouldn't be here." He turned. Sheriff Brackett stood in the doorway, gun lowered, but ready. "I trusted you," Jonah said. Brackett's expression flickered with something like regret. "So did I." Jonah didn't raise his hands. He stayed seated on the concrete floor of the storage unit, the camcorder still resting against his thigh, Evan Mercer's last words echoing in the hollow space between shelves. The smell of dust and oil clung to the air. Outside, a truck passed on the highway and kept going, oblivious. Brackett stood framed in the doorway, the overhead light casting a hard line down the center of his face. The gun in his hand wasn't shaking. "That footage won't change anything," Brackett said. "Not now." Jonah looked up at him. "You let kids die." Brackett's jaw tightened. "I let a town survive." Silence stretched. Somewhere nearby, a metal sign creaked in the wind. "They weren't supposed to die," Brackett continued, quieter now. "That was never the plan. Just lessons. Scare them straight. Kids run their mouths. Accuse people with power. You know how it is." Jonah laughed once, harsh and disbelieving. "You buried them in the ground." Brackett took a step inside. "You don't understand what Briar Hollow was before I took this badge. Drugs. Outsiders. Land getting sold off. People disappearing anyway, just not the ones folks cared about. I kept order." "You became the disease," Jonah said. Brackett studied him, eyes sad now. "And what did you do, Jonah?" "You signed the reports. You told mothers their kids probably left town. You went home and slept." Jonah felt the words hit, deep and accurate. "I was wrong," he said. "But I'm not you." Brackett raised the gun slightly. "I can still fix this." The sound that followed wasn't the gunshot Jonah expected. It was Rusty's growl. "Low. Close." Brackett's eyes widened just enough. The K9 launched from behind the shelves, a blur of muscle and teeth. The gun fired once, the shot punching into a stack of old boxes. Rusty hit Brackett hard, knocking him back into the doorframe. The gun skidded across the concrete. Jonah surged forward, grabbing it, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. "Don't," Brackett rasped, struggling under Rusty's weight. "Jonah!" "Stay," Jonah commanded. Rusty froze, teeth bared inches from Brackett's throat. Jonah cuffed him, hand steady now, something grim and settled locking into place inside his chest. "It's over," Jonah said. Brackett closed his eyes. The truth didn't break Briar Hollow all at once. It cracked it. State investigators arrived by nightfall. Then reporters. Then names started surfacing. Quiet donors, respected business owners, a church deacon. People who had known, or suspected, or chosen not to ask. Claire Whitman gave her statement without flinching. When the press asked her how long corruption had been embedded in the department, she answered simply, "Too long." Jonah testified 2 days later. He told the truth. About the reports. The assumptions. The comfort of believing the sheriff over grieving parents. He didn't excuse himself. He didn't ask for forgiveness. When it was over, he walked outside and sat on the courthouse steps with Rusty, watching snow begin to fall. Soft, clean, deceptive. "You still here?" Claire said, joining him. "For now," Jonah replied. She nodded. "They'll offer you early retirement." "Maybe," he said. She hesitated. "You could have destroyed the footage." Jonah looked at her. "So could you." They sat in silence, the town breathing around them, wounded but awake. Spring came late that year. The Miller land was fenced off, then turned into a memorial. 4 trees planted where the ground had once been disturbed, plaques bearing names that would no longer be whispered. Ruth Mercer attended the dedication. She stood beside Jonah, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "He came home," she said. "That matters." Jonah nodded, unable to speak. Rusty sat at his feet, older now, muzzle graying. Later, Jonah drove to the edge of town and parked by the river. He let the engine idle, listening to the water move, steady, indifferent, honest. He thought about the photograph. You dug too shallow. He understood it now. Some things weren't meant to stay buried. Not bodies. Not guilt. Not truth. Jonah rested his forehead against the steering wheel and closed his eyes, not in collapse this time, but in acceptance. Behind him, Briar Hollow would keep living. But it would never forget. And neither would he.